You're live.
Thank you. Welcome to McDowell Sonoran Preserve Commission meeting. Today is March 3rd, 2020. And first thing I'd like to do is call to order. So let's start with Vice Chair Marshall Lips. Marshall Lips here. Commissioner Steve
Toulouchet here.
Commissioner Mark Happer.
Akbar here.
Commissioner Jeffrey Smith.
Commissioner Smith here.
Commissioner Cynthia Wenstrom here, and Commissioner Terry Olson. Okay, do we have any public comments now? There's no public comment today.
Chair Pat Palaska, we do not have public comment today.
Oh, and Chairman Pat Palaska is here also. Okay, next thing we'd like to do is move on to approval of minutes. Would someone like to make a motion? Anybody have any comments or changes to the February 17th?
I don't have any changes, but I guess I have one comment. This is Commissioner Toulouchet. If you compare the point 7, discuss summary of council feedback from January 11th work study, and if you compare a lot of those elements to the city council's minutes from that meeting, I don't know, I wouldn't pull disconnects, but there's some subtle differences there that I would just recommend that we make sure that we thoroughly understand the city council's take on that meeting, and make sure that we're addressing their issues as well as our own.
I'd like to make any changes to these minutes at this point.
No, I don't.
Anybody else have any comments or any changes? Someone like to make a
I'd like
motion?
to make a motion to accept the minutes from February 17th.
And this is Commissioner Western. I will second that motion. Let's take a vote. Commissioner Marshall. Commissioner Lopes. Yes. Commissioner Steve Toulouchet.
Commissioner Toulouchet, yes.
Commissioner Mark Happer.
Akbar says yes.
Commissioner Jeffrey Smith.
Commissioner Smith says yes.
Commissioner Cynthia Wenstrom. Commissioner Wenstrom says yes. And Chairperson Pat Palaska says yes. Our next item is.
Excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
If you guys can hear me, this is Tina with eScribers. I can hear everyone else, but I'm having a hard time hearing the chair.
Oh, sorry about that. I will project louder.
Sit up here. We're going to relocate our seats just briefly to get closer to the microphone.
Okay, now I'm really close enough to project at the same time.
Is that better, Tina?
Tina, can you hear me?
That's better. Thank you.
Okay, the next thing on the agenda is an update from the McDowell Sonoran Preserve Commission. Justin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. It is my pleasure tonight to not be the only one giving an update. So tonight I would like to introduce our new Director of Science and Education, Melanie Toulouchet, who is here with me tonight, and she will be giving you an update on our education programs. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioners, Chair and Vice Chair. Is everyone able to hear me through the microphone?
Can you hear okay, Tina?
I can hear well enough. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So I'm really happy to be here and to update you on an exciting new program that we have under our education pillar. For a long time, our education was very focused on the preserve and working with visitors who came to the preserve. And over the last few years, we've really been able to start reaching out to the schools and working directly with the teachers to build initiatives that really speak to their curriculum. And that's extremely important if you want to have the schools involved, because it creates an opportunity where the teachers can bring either the kids to the preserve or we bring opportunities to them that actually give the teachers a little bit of break and create less work for them instead of more, and that's our goal. So one of these opportunities is something that we're piloting right now, and actually next week we have 3 big field trips, and that's with the Scottsdale Unified School District. We're working with a cohort of 7 7th grade teachers and one of their administrators, their director of the science programs. And what we've done is back in the summer, we presented to them about what kind of research we're doing on the preserve. So we had our Field Institute staff present a number of projects that they thought would be of interest. And the 7th grade teachers took notes, and then they selected a project that they think would be doable for their students and brought it back and developed their lesson plan. So instead of us guessing what they needed, they were actually paid through a grant from Scottsdale to develop this curricula that was exactly what they needed. And it wasn't only just for their 7th grade classes, but it was actually addressed a gap in learning from the last year in COVID. So it bridged the 6th and the 7th grade curricula in a way that only the teachers would really be able to do. And then they worked with the Conservancy staff and stewards to actually host the students to come out to the trailheads and not only do a tour, but actually collect data that was based on the project that we have ongoing. That project was our Phenology Project, and that's something that we do to look at the plant, sort of the timing of flowering and fruiting and budding and things like that that are really important in plant communities. It's something that scientists study, but now these 7th graders are able to come and collect data that, you know, is equivalent to what the scientists are doing. So it gives them this deeper sense of purpose and understanding of the ecosystem. A couple weeks ago, we had the first series of classes, which was a combined 200 students that we had come out to the Bahada Nature Trail. And I think many of you are familiar with the Bahada Nature Trail. The teachers used all of the signage and broke it into, broke the students into groups that would go from station to station and collect this data, read the signs, answer questions. They each have a field guide that they fill out. That was our biggest, scariest one. I think everyone was quaking in their boots just a little bit, wondering how these 200 students would behave, but it went off without a hitch. It was beautiful. We're going to stick to 100 or less from now on. But I have to say it was very successful. And they cleaned up everything, just left it beautiful, and we got great reports from the teachers. We had another 100 come out the week after that, and that went, even better. And then next week, we're going to have 3 groups of around 100 come out and do the same thing. This is something that really has leveraged the resources of the teachers by, through the grant, they were able to be paid to do this, and has leveraged the resources of the Conservancy. We didn't have to write the curricula for them. They did that, but we were able to support them with the services that we already have. And together we've made a much bigger impact in a shorter amount of time than either of us would have been able to do alone. So I wanted to report on that. I think by the end of it, we will have had, easily 500 students through that program. And that's just the pilot. We hope to build on it from there and continue using the curriculum that those teachers have created. And I think that this creates a new model through which we can work with these, not only the Scottsdale schools, but other school districts as well. So we're really excited to pilot that this year, and we're excited about all of the developments and possibilities, blending our science and education offerings, and the sky's the limit. Any questions? Yes.
You mentioned that the teachers do a grant for able to be creative. Is that being paid to be in the preserve or creating the curriculum?
Both. Yeah.
So we're doing this on their own time.
Yes, which is extremely difficult, and it's one of the barriers that teachers face in doing things like that. Yeah.
took them out there and you had this initial meeting, and then there's like, is there additional follow-up things that they're going to?
Yeah.
The students are going to fill out or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So we worked with the teachers, over the course of the fall, to assist them in developing the curricula. And then they come out and the students fill out their field guides. And that basically completes a lot of the science standards that they would have otherwise had to complete in a classroom, perhaps with examples that were not as close to home or didn't apply to the Sonora Desert.
You mentioned it was going to develop plants.
Yes. We can certainly build on this idea to include other things. The teachers selected our phenology project because it was the closest to what they could teach, in the 7th grade classroom. And because we already have phenology, studies set up along that particular trail, there's nothing to stop us from looking at cultural resources, bringing animals into it, as long as it's something that the students can observe from the trail.
Commissioner Cluccio, Melanie, so the expedition days are what grades typically?
Yeah, that started as 3rd grade, and we linked it to the 3rd grade curricula, and we've expanded that out this year to include 4th grade.
And so this is a totally different group of students here.
Yeah.
Talking about grade. Okay, thank you.
Have you had, Commissioner Smith, any conversations with the governor's office and the state superintendent of education? They have a new program for summer schools / we've got a lot of federal dollars that they use for that. Has there been any conversations about participating in that?
Not to my knowledge.
Since that is a new program, we haven't started down that road yet. But we have talked to Scott over the past few years about incorporating the summer camp idea, and it just grown enough legs because we don't have a facility in the preserve that's climate controlled within it. So what's the balance in the summer? Would the students come out at 6 a.m. and then we bring them back? And now, as of yesterday, we have an office that can accommodate workshops. We moved our offices yesterday. So we now have a facility that could host indoor workshops and things. So it's a great idea. And then I'll just tag on to what Melanie said. This is just again for those online. Our intent is to someday have a K through 12 spiraling curriculum that we can incorporate through Scottsdale Unified and beyond. And we started with 3rd grade because it matched so well with the work we were currently doing in the curriculum standards. And the teachers said rather than having to talk in the classroom about the interaction of a squirrel and a tree in London, because that's what the textbook is. This has been so highly successful because it relates to where these youth relate. And in 7th grade with phenology, as we move it through the other grades, there will highly likely be a cultural archaeological when that curriculum is right in the K through 12 spiral mammals, when it fits into the curriculum of whatever grades we expand onto. But one of the things I'm most proud of was the superintendent, Dr. Menzel, that really pushed for this program that we launched, and that the grant also paid, and how it paid, it didn't pay us per se, because we weren't a worry on it, but the school covered the cost of substitute teachers so that the teachers could come do this during their work. So to have the school district pay for substitute teachers is unheard of if you work for school districts before. So to be able to let the teachers out of the classroom while they paid for substitutes so the teachers could work with us while on the clock was phenomenal. And we're so grateful for Dr. Menzel for spearheading.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 6.
Okay.
And that's an update update about the Maricopa County Flood Control District?
Yes, thank you, Chair Velasco, Commissioners. This will be a kind of a twofold presentation. I'm going to do a brief introduction, and then I'm going to turn it over to Steve Waters, who's with us virtually from the Maricopa County Flood Control District. And this item is in direct response to inquiries from the Commission, in particular Commissioner Hackbar, the interest in how this data is collected and utilized. So we're going to go through that. But first, just briefly, you may have seen on the left here these upright tubes with the antenna sticking out of the top. Now that you kind of see what it looks like, you may start noticing them around other parts of town. The map on the right is from our most recent rainstorm, and you can see each one of those little boxes is a rain gauge in our area that is collecting data. Steve will go through a lot more elaborate, detailed uses of the data, but for our simplistic purposes, when we're looking, particularly the monsoon, we have sporadic monsoon storms that blow through. We might get 2 inches of rain at Tracefield and nothing over at Gateway. So, I'm always looking at, I have a bookmark on my phone. I'm always looking at these numbers to decide, do we need to get out and look at, is there potential trail damage in certain areas? Or, the year that we had the snowstorm followed by all the rain after that, we were looking at the data to see, how saturated might any given area of preserve be. So that's sort of a simplistic example. Steve will go through more detailed examples. And, of course, this data is used also by the Conservancy and a lot of the science and research that happens. There are the four red circles that you see are gauges that are within the preserve. The one in the south, that's on Thompson Peak. It's kind of within the preserve, but it's not on our property. The county actually owns a piece of land where the antennas are, so it's actually on county land surrounded by city. But in the north, the three red circles you see, the one at the bottom right, that's Bracefield. We actually inherited that when we bought the state land. The gauge was already out there, and then we entered an agreement with Maricopa County to manage that gauge. And then the other two, the one at the top right is Old Paint, bottom left is the Pinnacle Peak power line. Those are newer ones that we've added. We do these through simple, we call it a right of entry. It's in essence granting the county the right to place a temporary piece of equipment. Even though they dig a hole and they stand it up and concrete it in, it's a really small footprint. They're relatively easy. I mean, if for whatever reason we needed them out of there, they could be removed very simply. So we do it through a real simple legal agreement between the city and the county. And the orange circle is one that we're actually working on right now that I think Steve will touch on a little bit. That's called the middle rawhide gauge that will give us, when you see where these data points are, it kind of fills in a gap for us. And not only is this information useful for the preserve, but what Steve will get into, it's also part of the flood warning system. That Rawhide Wash is a huge watershed. If it gets a lot of rain on it, it's going downstream, not only through the preserve, but into the community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve, who is he's a hydrometeorologist and flood warning program manager for Maricopa County Flood Control District. So Steve, take it away, and then just give me a little shot when you want me to advance the slides.
Thank you, Scott. How's my audio?
We can hear you just fine.
All right. Well, I would think you could because I'm sitting right on top of my laptop. Anyway, I appreciate y'all having me present tonight, and let's get started. Elements of a flood warning program. So the county's flood warning program has a number of elements outside of detection. Detection would be how do we know how much it's raining, or how do we know what flows are happening where? That's done with gauging. That's done with observers in the field. It's done with weather radar and products that radar can be adjusted by the gauges themselves to be a little more accurate. But there are a number of other parts. Planning we'll touch on a little bit. Communication. We have to get that information to people who can use it. And action, what they do when they get it. We have to maintain the equipment. And then we conduct exercises at least once a year, sometimes more frequently, where we play a scenario for part of a day And the players are exposed to actual data and they have to make decisions based on what they see. Slide. So who do we report to? We have 22 dams and some number of dozens of miles of channels and dozens of basins that we have instrumented, and we relay that information to people who need it. A lot of times that's our own county Department of Emergency Management, who may make decisions on whether or not to evacuate an area that might be prone to flood. Or other county departments and agencies. We do not warn the public directly. That's the job of the Weather Service. But we do warn just about every fire department, law enforcement agency, public works department, and whatever else in the county. We don't initiate the evacuations. That's done by either county or local emergency management. Slide. And we work with a number of partners, a couple of county departments. Of course, we have vendors and consultants who help us select, and they actually produce the equipment. All the data that we collect is also shared with the National Weather Service in real time. Both the Phoenix Weather Office, the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center, and the National Severe Storms Laboratory. Of course, we partner with the USGS, the Geological Survey, Department of Water Resources, and various land agencies like the Preserve, who grant us permits to put gauges on their property. Next slide. So how does this alert system work? It starts with gauges out in the field. So the upper left corner shows an alert station, and that station is collecting rainfall or runoff or weather data and radio that data through a repeater or directly, and it's picked up in two places. Our alert room, which is at the bottom, is the main place that we operate out of. If for some reason we could not do that, we can go over to the Department of Emergency Management, where we have another station that's collecting all of the same data. And then all the data is available to anyone who wants to look at it via the web. And we can log in actually from home and do some of our work during events with remote PCs or phones. Next slide. So as the alert system has grown since 1980, it hasn't just been the flood warning branch here at the district, but a whole host of folks who have requested that gauges be installed. They might be as part of some project. They might be a part of some emergency action or flood response plan. So just a host of people who have asked us, hey, we like your network. We know it's reasonably reliable. We'd like to get in on that. Next. So as it exists now, the network goes pretty much from Gila Bend and Casa Grande over to the Superstitions, all the way up past Prescott, to the west over to Wendon and Siloam, and back down to Aguila. 11,000 square miles, a much larger area than the size of New Jersey. There are 410 independent or individual transmitting stations. 357 of those are rain, 217 are water level, and 40 weather stations. And we have some flashing roadway signs that actually can be turned on by an upstream stream gauge. So we don't even have to man them from here to turn them on. They'll be turned on by flow upstream and actually be flashing before the water gets there. Next slide. This is how the system has grown over time. We had big floods, of course, in central Arizona in 1979 and 1980. And that's pretty much when the alert system started. Then we had more flooding in 92 and 93. So a good slug of gauges went in after those floods, and it kind of tapers off all the way until we get to monsoon summer 2014. And then all of a sudden, people are throwing money at us again. So it kind of goes in waves, but that's how it's built out over time. Next slide. So I'm going to show you a few things rather than just the regular reports of how much it rained in a certain period or what the current stream flow is. Due to time constraints, this is one thing that we can do. We can look at the average monsoon across the whole county. And then for a particular year, we can plot how this year's monsoon relates to all the past monsoons. So this is for water year 19. You can see south of downtown and most of the southeast in Pinal County were quite a bit below normal. The lighter greens and blues are close to normal. And the really dark blues out in the very West County were quite a bit above normal that year. This is very common to see for the monsoon, that certain areas of the county get normal rainfall, certain get above normal, and others get below normal. Next slide. NOAA Atlas 14 is a National Weather Service produced booklet at one time. Now it's all online, but it provides design engineers with rainfall amounts based on return period data. So back in 2002, we were lucky enough to be able to give National Weather Service data from about 25 and 28 of our gauges. And when this atlas is produced again, we'll have close to 100 with the required amount of data to be used in this scientific publication. Next slide. Of course, there are alternative uses for alert data. People use it for a number of things: water supply and climatology. We keep climatological summaries of our weather station data that people use. Air quality modeling. We actually here at the district ingest the air quality data from Maricopa County air quality and use our same platform to display that. Of course, weather forecasting, watering, design of structures, groundwater, and a number of forensic applications for lawyers and insurance companies and things like that. Next. So, as Scott mentioned, the rain gauge that we're proposing is the one that you see here as just a green dot by itself. Yes, that's it. So this is how it sits in relation to some of the other stations. Old Paint Wash has a transducer that measures the water that's in one of the game watering structures on the preserve. And if you go to the next slide, Scott, you'll see down the proposed location for this one, for Middle Rawhide, is also on a game watering facility. I don't know that we have money in this year's budget to add a transducer to this one, but it's nice to know how much it rains there anyway, and it works for both of us because we have a new project going in on the southern end of Rawhide Wash. So this will be much needed information for that particular watershed. Next slide. This is Old Paint Wash. at the game watering facility there. So the new one will look pretty much exactly like this one. Next. So how do we decide on where's a good place to put a rain gauge? We use a really old method called Thiessen polygons that can be run now in GIS. These polygons would outline, if somebody called me and said, I'm at Scottsdale Road and Lone Mountain, what's the closest or best gauge for me to use? Well, the gauge that is in the center of that polygon is Rawhide wash. So the empty green dot up there where middle Rawhide is going to go is on one of the bisectors or the confluence point of a number of these polygons. And that tells us that's a good spot for it to be. It's equidistant from a number of gauges. And then when we're using gauge correction to modify radar maps and things like that, we get a good spread over the whole portion of the county that we're looking at here. Next. Okay, very quickly, another thing that we use rainfall and runoff data for is flood response plans. And there are a number of them, as you can see, around the county. We put these together using a format that came from Denver's urban drainage and flood district way back in the 90s. If you go to the next slide, Scott, there's really four, they boil down to four pieces for a particular water course. What kind of detection or prediction messages will trigger the use of the plan? And then what are the actions that are required once that trigger's been met? And where are the trouble areas along the wash? And then what are the critical times as water goes down the wash? How much lead time do people have to prepare when things are going on? And we do this for hundreds of washes around the county and provide those to the jurisdictions that are responsible for those particular water courses. Next. Here's an example from South Mountain, Levine. So we looked at an area south of the Salt River, north of South Mountain, and then cut off by Loop 202 and I-10. When we put these together, we deliver hardbound plans, but also maps and well maps, and we create an online information interface that the responders, even out to the level of police and fire in their vehicles using internet, can get access to these maps and information. Next. So many of these jurisdictions might have a particular ready, set, go, or green, yellow, red that they're already using in their own emergency operations manuals. And we try to copy that or use that as a template for these plans when we get a chance. So here we're seeing many red zones during a very extreme event in that South Mountain Levine area, areas that people would have to watch when they're doing their response. Next. This is the actual screenshot from the online, what we call the flood response online map.
Can't hear you.
I'm sorry. So on this is all the information in their particular area of interest, all in one place. So we're seeing rain gauges and water level gauges and weather stations on squares. Next. And with that, I'll entertain questions.
Yeah. My
First question is, does the district monitor groundwater?
Scott, could you repeat the question, please?
The question, Steve, was if the district monitors groundwater in addition to the other things.
The answer to that is no. Arizona Department of Water Resources does the groundwater work for the entire state. And it's really kind of outside of the scope of our flooding mission.
Steve, this is Commissioner Pat Plasko. Thank you very much. I know that the flood control district really focuses on the volume and how fast it rains and all that kind of stuff. Do you guys also monitor the stormwater quality by testing for it? Or is that mostly by the cities through their NIMBY permits?
If I understood the question, do we monitor stormwater quality? And the answer to that is no. We did back in the 90s and 2000s when there were permits by the EPA called the NIPDES program. And there were certain county waterways that we had to monitor and provide reports for. That program kind of went away, and I think really the only people who are doing that now are Arizona Department of Water Resources and the USGS.
Any questions? Thank you very much, Steve. We appreciate the information.
All right, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next agenda item is staff reports.
All right. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. We've got several items on the staff report tonight, many, if not most of which, are in response to interest and questions from the Commission. There are real things that are happening out there in the preserve that are topics of discussion and ones that you've been particularly interested in. So we'll go through a few of those. First is really just kind of a quick update. I presented this at the last meeting. We're working, the Conservancy, the city, we're now under contract with a company called ACE that I had mentioned to do invasive plant treatments. So Melanie and I have had, I don't know, half a dozen conversations in the last week on planning between Melanie and Paul Staker, who's one of the, I think many of you know Paul, very active steward. Paul and a few other stewards have spent a lot of time over the last few years not only mapping invasives in the preserve, but also applying treatments to invasives in the preserve. So the process that we're going through now really is, okay, with all the knowledge they have and the experience they've gained and the work, actual physical work that they've done, now that we're, we have the funding through APS that we talked about to start bringing some other resources into it. What does that look like? Where do we actually go? We're going to start here at Browns Mountain. And then we're going to build out from there over space and time. And we'll continue to come back and hopefully bring you lots of pictures of dead invasive plants as we go on. But just wanted to give you a quick update on that. Are there any questions on invasives? Yes, Steve.
Commissioner Cuccio here. So yeah, I was out at Brown Ranch today, and as we went out into the rock, it was kind of like looking at the mountain there. A lot of different colors, shades of green. I assume some of that depicts where all the buffalo grass is out there, right?
Yes, you can, certainly on those south slopes of Browns Mountain, you can see it up there. It certainly caused for concern when you see some of it, but there's also some that you're seeing that belongs there. There's particular patches of one grass called Hilaria that is growing in certain portions that from a distance, especially when it's brown, it looks like, oh my gosh, pulse grass. No, that down there is actually Hilaria. So there's some that belong there. And in some of the discussions we've had when ACE gets here, I mean, they treat invasive plants, for a living. They have a lot of experience, but they also have a lot of crew turnover because it's kind of a youth corps type organization. So the stewards, Melanie and the Conservancy staff and the stewards are going to spend time on the ground with the contractors, not only doing orientation on the front end of which plants are which, and then they're going to kind of stay with them and help guide them with plant identification. Because the last thing we want to do is accidentally treat plants that belong there on the preserve. Because some of the bunch grasses can, grass is just hard in general. A giant flowering fountain grass plant is pretty obvious. But when it's not flowering, or when you're looking at other types of bunch grasses that are common in the desert, sometimes, without a magnifying glass, a lot of them can look pretty similar. So yes, there's lots of types out there. We're going to obviously target particularly fountain grass and buckle grass.
Do we know how many applications, we're expecting to have to make in order to really eradicate buckle grass on?
Well, in some of the research that the Conservancy's done specifically on that topic, and that Melanie could touch on, but in general, we're also looking at this, that we're going to have to do a lot of work to knock down the populations of invasives, but we will never be done treating invasives, because the moment we think we got them all out of there, they're constantly, unless the entire state, the entire Southwest, the entire country was able to eradicate them, they're going to constantly be trying to come back. So we anticipate, over time, hopefully our amounts of treatments can get less and less over time, but it's going to take some time to get to that point, and then we'll never be totally finished.
And you don't know.
Come up here, Melanie.
Yeah, to really.
Come closer.
Thank you. This is Melanie Luchek, just to add on to what Scott just said. In order to really start to control population of invasive plants, it usually takes 2 to 3 applications per year for about 3 to 5 years to really knock it down. But you do see a stepwise decrease in cost and effort, especially if you really get after it the first few years.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we can keep that from spreading, because we want them going downward, not upward. And there's been some upward trending in some areas.
I have one more question. So as you come out of Lost Dog and say go west on Via Linda, there you make that turn. As you're going down the street, there's buckle grass just lining the road, for probably just maybe a quarter mile or something like that. Does the city, and of course that's very close to the preserve. Does the city do anything outside of the preserve to eradicate invasive species like that?
To a degree, yes. The city maintains a lot of right-of-ways around the city. That particular stretch of Via Linda is not maintained by the city. It's maintained typically by homeowners associations that align the sides of the road. Any place where the city is doing the maintenance, any type of weed is being removed, especially fountain grass, buffalo grass. A lot of times tamarisk, even desert broom, even though it's a native, it can be kind of invasive. Loves to grow, especially in irrigated areas. So any place that the city is maintaining, you probably won't see it there because it's not been allowed to grow, or if it tries to sprout, it gets removed. We have had discussions, and I know the Conservancy in the past, and it's in the plans for the future, is to work more closely with homeowners associations on that particular topic, not only for their streets and their residents, but like in that Lost Dog Wash area, there's huge sections of the actual Lost Dog Wash outside the preserve that are owned by the homeowner. They're common tracts of homeowners associations. So that's I don't think there's a huge amount of work happening right now on that front, but it's in the plans and in the goals.
Does the city have any capability to put pressure on homeowners or homeowner associations?
I think the pressure would mostly come through education and advisement on the topic. And, it could be a component of the Firewise, that when the fire department presented to the group, invasive plants and weeds in general are part of the Firewise program. So any community that gets involved with that would certainly be advised about invasive plants. And then beyond that, I think it's mostly education on what plants belong, which ones don't. In the past, the Conservancy did do the plant swap program, where they could bring in a you know, a harvested fountain grass plant and get I think it was deer grass, I think it was native deer grass plants that they were giving back. And I think that's something that's in the thoughts to continue to do.
This is not decorative plants that are on people's property, or people's front lawns. You know, this is stuff that's not supposed to be there. So.
Correct, yeah.
Just one comment on that, Steve. So our HOA, this is a number of years ago, we got the city involved and said, we want to get rid of a particular desert broom because it was such a problem. And I mean, we went after it like crazy. And we really kept up with it to where a lot of the neighbors' yards actually had desert broom in it because it was considered at that point to be somewhat of a landscaping plant. And that's all but gone from our area. So the city was really thoughtful with that. But we, I think, took the first step and asked for what would you recommend we do? But yeah, it was very helpful and it's definitely helped put that down.
Okay, moving on. Our next topic is the trail crossing of the Gooseneck Trail, where it crosses Rio Verde Drive or Dynamite at 128th Street. This is a topic that we've touched on in the past. Commissioner Toulouchet has expressed interest. I know the other commissioners and the group is interested in this topic as well. Tonight I have kind of some basic information about it, and we'll talk a little bit about the process. But this will be a topic that unfolds over months and potentially over years, and how this ultimately gets addressed. Of course, this is the area where the wildlife crossing crosses Dynamite. We've had the discussions on the policy goals of a land bridge or some sort of crossing structure for wildlife. Typically, when we've had those conversations, we always mention, oh yeah, and there's the recreation. Well, this is the recreation piece to it. Obviously, it's preserved land on both sides of the street. The street itself is managed by the transportation department. So ultimately, this will be in their court on what type of crossing, structure, signage, whatever happens, really will be determined by them. They have, if you've ever had experience working on traffic issues in your neighborhoods or things like that, the transportation department is guided by very specific guidelines. They call them warrant studies. A lot of it comes from federal highways and through the state to the city. It's why you can drive city to city and the traffic signals look the same, the street signs look the same, the warning signs. When you're driving the freeway across the country, everything looks the same. It's all guided by these federal standards. On the warrant side, they won't just go and put in a traffic signal or put in a stop sign. There's specific guidelines. They have to collect data on how many people are crossing, how many cars are there on the road, and all of that goes into this model that will determine the appropriate type of crossing. So a lot of it has to do with liability. If you went and just put a stop sign in or whatever, because we thought it was a great idea. Somebody gets injured there and it wasn't warranted to put it there, the city could be liable for it. So they're very strict about following the warrant processes. So what we know here is anecdotally, there's people crossing this road already on the Gooseneck Trail. We have put a game camera out to start with. It's been out since December that we're using. We're basically tallying the photos and seeing how many people are crossing. So we're starting to collect that. I don't have a lot of specific data points to share with you tonight, but we are collecting that data. We'll bring you more detail in the future. And that will be the data that we provide to the transportation department on exactly what's happening as far as people are crossing the road. Because you can drive by here and go, wait, I've never seen anybody cross there. We know people are. I think there's quite a few people that are doing it. So we're using a camera right now. I am going to expand it. Next week, we're going to put in a couple of trail counters on both, one on each side, that we can use to just kind of track those numbers of people that are crossing. And this, again, will be a conversation that we'll bring back to the group, and we'll get additional feedback and information from the transportation department. There was a specific question asked about signage on Dynamite, Rio Verde Drive, related to the crossing. So this is if you are eastbound. First, you're going to see they call that an advanced street name sign. So it's warning you there's an intersection coming up, and then it's 128. And that sign you see off in the distance is this one. So it does indicate that there's a trail crossing. These signs have been up since when we first built the Gooseneck Trail connecting across here, we worked with our traffic engineers and they installed these signs. And then if you turn around the other way, this must have been a beautiful monsoon day that Google took this picture. But there's also the trail crossing sign. You can see the culverts there on the left is 128th Street. So the Gooseneck Trail is crossing right about through there. So it is signed. We are collecting data, and we'll continue to have that conversation with the transportation department about the ultimate disposition of not only the recreational crossing, but then in that longer term goal, what's the ultimate treatment to this section of Dynamite for the wildlife concerns as well.
Commissioner Lewis, basically, what is the, do you think that there's going to be much effect once those homes are placed in that area right next to there, in terms of the number of people that are trying to cross over there?
I think that certainly could affect the use of the Gooseneck Trail, and it could also affect the usage of 128th Street. It could affect the usage of Dynamite. There's several other developments further to the east that are proposed, and then of course the expansion in Rio Verde, that area. The transportation department does routinely collect data. When you see the black rubber tubes that are out across the roads, they do kind of through the whole city. They have streets on various schedules to go around and collect that data. So they'll be monitoring that. They have been monitoring it, and they'll be watching for changes as well.
Commissioner Toulouchet, first of all, thank you for putting it on as an agenda item. I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate that some basic work has already begun. So that's very encouraging. I understand the transportation department is really the one that makes the call on something like this. So thank you for addressing it and picking up the ball on that. As an aside, I've gone through there, I don't know how many times, in fact, just on Tuesday, and I've never seen those signs. So I'm serious. I've never noticed that sign there. So, I don't know whether it's my driving or, whether, signs aren't really big enough to catch my attention.
Yeah.
Maybe other motorists' attention, they do, but in my case.
You'll notice them now.
What's that?
You'll notice them now.
I'm going out there tomorrow and I'm gonna look.
Yeah. And they are,
road if Steve is driving by.
And what I mentioned about
I don't see the sign, but I even see the pedestrians.
Sure. And what I mentioned about the federal standards, it's called the MUTCD, the Manual Uniform Traffic Control Devices. So where these signs are placed, as far as distance from the intersection, distance off the road, size, height, colors, the font, everything is scripted. So what's there now is in compliance with the MUTCD, but of course subject to further conversations and data collection and determinations of what should be the ultimate disposition of this crossing.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Our next topic is the summer heat messaging and coordination with other valley communities. And there's kind of 4 steps that we're going to go through here. First, I'm going to go through background of what Phoenix, kind of their system and what they've actually been doing. Usage of our preserve on the extreme heat days when Phoenix has closed. And then we'll review just quickly our heat and safety messaging. And then at the end, thoughts and questions from the commission. Again, this is an item, we've talked about this several times, updates about safety and heat messaging. I think we have it tentatively scheduled for May or June, May, to talk about this again. And similar to the prior item where we're working with our transportation department, this one we're working very closely with our public safety, particularly the fire department. They've started kind of crunching through some of the data. But when we come back with this item, we'll have more information about, numbers of rescues and areas and causes and all that sort of stuff. And then let's see. So going right into it, I know a lot of you have probably used different Phoenix facilities. They have 10 preserve systems. So South Mountain, North Mountain, Shadow Mountain, Kemmel Mountain. They have 36,000 preserve acres, mostly up in the northern part. A lot of those state lands that they acquired through Growing Smarter grants, similar to what Scottsdale did. They have 7,000 mountain park acres. They have 242 miles of designated trails in those areas. And they estimate that they had 6.2 million visitors in 2020. They did do, I think a lot of you heard, it was all over the media, the pilot program that they launched last summer to shut down Camelback and Piestewa on extreme heat days. They ran that test, and they have now made it a permanent program that they are going to do. So they closed those 2 spots from 11 to 5 on those heat days. And then why did they pick Camelback and Piestewa? Of that 6.2 million estimated visits, 20% of it happens at these 2 places combined together. It's 20% of their total use, and it's about 50% of their mountain rescues happen. They're difficult. If you hike Camelback, they're difficult, they're rocky, they're steep. They do tend to get quite a few out-of-town visitors, which anecdotally may not be quite as acclimated as people that live here. And then from Phoenix Fire, one of the main issues with it's also difficult for them to facilitate rescues because of those difficult conditions. So this is the information on exactly why they chose those sites. But then to put it in perspective with their system, the 2 little yellow triangles, that's Camelback and Piestewa, all those other spots, and those numbers are the rough miles of trails that they have. They have over 215 miles of trails elsewhere in Phoenix that don't get closed. So they shut down these 2 because of those reasons, but you could still go hike 114 miles at South Mountain or any of these other sites. This just shows, this is these kind of gray or greenish colored squares are the days of their pilot program. The red were the extreme heat days. So there were 8 out of 69 days. So what Croy and I had done, and we touched on this back in September with the group. So this is essentially that same information we talked about then. Taking the 5 extreme heat days of August when Phoenix closed, what we did was looked at our counters at Gateway, Lost Dog, Sunrise, and Browns, and averaged those 5 days together from 11 to 5. So the numbers in red are the average daily use during those 5 days at these 4 different sites. Then the next column, the not extreme heat, what we did was we took, if one of those closure days was a Monday, we took the Monday before and the Monday after, and possibly even the Monday after that. So we tried to pick, we didn't want to compare a Monday to a Saturday. We were trying to pick days out of the calendar that seemed similar. So it's not highly scientific, but we thought we were being pretty specific about what we were picking at. And then we averaged those together. So you see the numbers in that column. And then what you'll see is we're about 40 to 50% lower usage on those extreme heat days when Phoenix was closed. So one thing we can glean from this is we're not seeing a surge of people coming into our preserve because Camelback is closed or because Piestewa is closed. And I mean, the simple answer here is probably what was really, really hot. So people just stayed home. And this is very anecdotal, but Phoenix's closures get a lot of play in the media. And, that's why I wanted to kind of go through tonight the, what they're actually doing, because a lot of people don't really know exactly what they're doing. And when you put it in perspective of their whole system, they're leaving a lot open, they're closing these 2 specific places, but it is all over the media when they do that and you hear about it. And I think that that's indicating to the rest of the community, gosh, maybe we should stay inside today. So I think we're getting a secondary effect off of their closure, plus it's just really darn hot outside during those days. So to quickly review, our safety messaging, the sandwich boards we put up just to encourage people to reduce their need of being rescued. The one on the right is just a screenshot of on those really, really hot days, that's the sign that we put out. And we try to put them right in your pathway. So like a gateway, we put it right in front of the pedestrian bridge. So you literally have to walk around it to get onto the trail. We use them in our message slider cabinets. This is over at the Sunrise Trailhead. And then our dog warnings, the one on the left, those are our permanent dog safety panels. Those are up year round. And then the one on the right is the image out of our slider panels that we put out when it's in those particularly hot periods. So we're going to continue to push our messaging. Of course, this gets translated a lot onto Facebook and our other social media outlets. Similar, you may have noticed some of our rain refrain messaging that we put out. When we have these extreme heat days, we also push messages out through our city folks. The Conservancy is fabulous at putting those messages out as well. Yeah.
I'm just curious on the dog piece. I don't know if there's any kind of a count of dogs in any trailhead on a given day, but if there is, have we noticed that there's been a reduction in people being mindful of these signs and just being more dog aware?
Great question. We have not specifically been counting dogs, so we don't have any real metrics on it. But anecdotally, and knock on wood, we have not had, to our knowledge, and things, it's a big place, things could always happen that we don't find out about. But several years ago, we were having a few dog rescues per year. Sadly, we had a few dog deaths each year. I can't remember the last one that we had. So I don't think we had any last summer. You got to go back 2 or 3 years to the point that we had any. And that's just anecdotally, those are very difficult situations and they tend to stick in your mind. This is also the sort of thing when nothing happens, nobody notices. I mean, you've been wildly successful because nothing happened, but then nobody really notices that nothing happened.
Right.
So we feel like we're making a difference. And we've also become a little more forthright and even potentially a little explicit in our signage that, you can kill your dog.
Yes.
And, we used to have, that panel used to be very wordy and it explained why and how they can overheat. And people just, it's too many words. They just didn't read it. So we boiled it down to the red graphic where it's just, we tried to make it as kind of infographic as possible, that you can kill your dog, but not just you could hurt your dog, you could literally kill them. And then the line, it's a little hard to read in the slide, but underneath that it says, and you can be held responsible. You can be charged with animal cruelty for that. So, when you see people stop and look at that, and then you see them talking to each other, oh my gosh, really? That can happen? So we feel like it's making a difference. And if it helps one person, it's a success.
I think it's phenomenal and it is very, you'll never know for sure, but the fact that you're not seeing things happen is a good sign. And I think that things like this do stay in people's minds before they put the leash on the dog and say, let's go ahead and put it on. 80 degrees.
Yes, we've had issues with dogs at that 80-degree point.
Absolutely.
It was 110 down there on the ground.
Absolutely. With a fur coat on. But no, I think it's wonderful. I'm really glad to hear that there's obviously some kind of success for some reason. It certainly hasn't gotten any cooler this summer. That hasn't changed. Right? So good job.
So with that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions or if there's thoughts. Again, this is a conversation that we want to kind of keep having, and especially on the educational front, it's kind of similar yet different from our invasives that we'll never be done with this topic. We'll constantly, we'll get to a point, but then it's just going to be maintenance and constant education of people, and people are always turning over, always getting new people. So this education and effort will continue on forever.
Commissioner Toulouchet here. So Scott, did I hear you say earlier that the fire department was digging into the data on the rescues, and I assume, where they happened and what the rescue was for and all that stuff. So
Yes.
So that'll be interesting and good information to have, I think. My biggest concern here is not just for the visitors, it's for the first responders. Because I think that in the case of Phoenix, if my recollection is correct, that the fire department was the one who really pushed, for the closures of these places because of the difficulty and, the danger of having their first responders go out there and do this, in those conditions. So I'll be really interested in the data, but also, if the Scottsdale Fire Department doesn't feel like there's any need to make changes, then I would certainly respect, their position.
There's another little piece to the data as well that, we want to continue to talk with them. We'll talk with this group. But we've also had conversations with the Conservancy, particularly on the Pathfinder program side of, how great would it be to be able to share that with the pathfinders that, hey, it tends to be, visitors from out of town between, May 1st and June 15th during, between 9 and 11, and you're like, that's you. I'm talking to you, and, it's a good way to get people's attention and really educate them that, this is no joke. And so that's something we've been continuing to talk with the Conservancy about, is how can we share this information in a way that it can be shared directly to the public like that. Okay. Yep, so the next item, agenda item 8, is our upcoming meeting dates, locations, and agenda items. This slide that you see here is essentially taken right off the agenda. On April 7th, we will have Game and Fish here. Typically, they'd be here tonight at our March meeting, but they had a conflict, so they'll be here in April to present to us the findings from the January large mammal survey. They'll do their annual update for us. And we'll also have an update on public safety in the preserve. This one will be geared a little bit more towards the law enforcement side and some of the considerations in our upcoming budgets. And then we'll review the preserve daily operations costs. It is in here for a possible field tour. If that's something that the commission is interested in. Particularly, we talked about getting out to see some of the areas that were talked about, during some of the policy discussions. So we can follow up on that and do some polling and see when people might be available and interested. And then moving into May, we'll come back with an update. Hopefully, we can show you lots of pictures of dead buffalo grass. And then we'll review the heat message like we were just chatting about. And then as we get into June, we're going to agendize the cooler pavement options that Commissioner Smith had asked about. We'll review cultural resource plan protection cost updates, as well as the transportation department with the crossing of 120th Street, or I'm sorry, crossing of Dynamite at 120th Street.
Questions, any comments?
On number 8.
Everything. Would somebody like to do a motion for adjournment? Oh, 9.
Item 9.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Anybody to comment?
I do. So I had the opportunity to speak as a public member at the 22nd of February work study with Transportation Commission. And number one, their commission, their work study was considerably longer than ours. They have more things to cover, so of course that would be the case. But there were a couple of key points I wanted to bring up. And we already had all agreed that 128th Street should be gated and for emergency access only. But I did bring up to the council, and this comes information straight from the commission meeting back in November, I think. So I talked about animal mortality because in the commission meeting in November, they talked about the fact that this minor collector could help speed up to 50 miles per hour. Well, my goodness, we are looking at animal mortality at 50 miles an hour above on Dynamite. So the real good reason not to have that as an open road. Number 2, I brought up the fact that motors to the preserve, of course, they're not allowed in the preserve. I did recognize, by the way, right up the front that I understand that the road itself is not preserved. But motors to the preserve on this minor collector would have between, or could have up to 5,000 to 15,000 per day going to the heart of the preserve. That comes again from the Transportation Commission meeting. And this is a 24/7 roadway. So again, a reason to not have that active preserve. But I thought the real kerfuffle was the fact that we're placing hot vehicles in the heart of the preserve. We are spending taxpayer dollars to mitigate fire issues on the perimeter of the preserve. It is a conflict of concern there. And then finally, I did speak to the fact that public safety has stated in writing that they can operate on any surface, including the existing surface. They do not need a roof surface, and as long as it is 6 feet wide that accommodates the wildland firefighting equipment. And then, of course, having Knox locks to give them access on either end of the gate. So I just wanted to share that with the commission. It is still important, even though we are commissioners, to still speak. We are public members first and residents first. So study session like that. Or and so does Steve Toulouchet. It was really nice to have a text from him saying that he had listened to that meeting.
Yeah, I listened to that meeting and I was very proud of you for getting up, and I didn't realize you were going to do that. So very thankful that you were there to do that.
Any other comments or questions?
Chair would like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Marshall Lips seconded.
Hey, let's vote. Okay, Commissioner Smith. Voting to adjourn.
Commissioner Smith votes yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Lucio votes yes.
Commissioner Wenstrom votes yes.
Commissioner Woods votes yes.
Votes yes.
Commissioner